All right. So a whirlwind, by its definition, is something like a tornado. It's fast-moving air, it's swirling around, and sometimes we even describe people and situations as whirlwinds. You know, they're energetic, tumultuous, they sometimes leave a wake of mess in their path. But I think that I just experience as close as you get physically to an actual whirlwind. Growing up in Western New York, every time people came to visit us, they wanted to go to Niagara Falls. So we would oblige and we'd take a short trip up to the falls and we'd walk along the river. We'd stop by the falls watching the water go cresting over the edge. We'd get a little bit wet by the mist, but then we'd kind of make our way to either a shopping center or a restaurant or something, because back in that day, the American exchange, the currency exchange was great, so you could do a lot in Canada on the American dollar, so we would enjoy those things. And you didn't even need a passport to enter the country at that point. So it was a pretty fun and easy trip. But we always forewent like the touristy attractions. We kept our visits fairly simple. So consequently, for all the times that I have been to Niagara Falls, I have never gotten this extreme close-up experience like the Maid of the Mist, you know, the boat that goes up by the falls. Have any of you ever done that? Raise your hand if you've done it, so you know what I mean. So I've never done any of those until about 2 weeks ago. We had the pleasure of traveling with our youth choir from Trinity here up to Buffalo, where we performed, well, actually we didn't perform, we led worship at Dave's mom's church up there in Buffalo. So they did us proud, by the way. They are just amazing, and we had a great time. So as part of this trip, however, we visited the Cave of the Winds. Now, the Cave of the Winds is on the American side of the falls. And you start by going into a room, and they make you take off your shoes and put them in a plastic bag. Now, you all understand how I feel about my shoes, so you know that I started getting very nervous at that point. Anywhere where you have to go and put your shoes in a plastic bag is not a good sign. So they give you these sandals that you get to put on. We all looked fabulous in them, by the way, and you get to take them home as a souvenir. I should have worn them today, but I didn't. Anyway, they don't go with anything I have. So we put our sandals on, and they lead us in a little line to an elevator that goes all the way down to the bottom of the falls. So you're standing in this elevator, not sure what's going to happen when the doors open. The doors open, and there's this huge, long tunnel, and there is proverbial light at the end of the tunnel. It's dark, and there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and you start marching down, and as you're going down this tunnel, the sound is getting louder and louder and louder of the falls, to the point where you exit out the light, and it's so loud that really you can barely hear the people you're with, let alone yourself thinking. And there at the end of the tunnel, they hand you a yellow poncho, which is actually a garbage bag with a hood and a string to pull it. Not very fashionable, but you're thinking, I'm not going to put this on, until you see the people coming back from it. They are drenched. I mean, completely and literally drenched. And some of them are laughing, some of them are smiling, and some of them look like they just had a near-death experience because they thought they were going to drown. So you think, all right, I'll put the plastic bag on. So you put on your little poncho, and you head on down this path. And it's just like a path, and then all of a sudden it becomes a series of decks and stairs. And you kind of walk along these decks and stairs until you are actually, at some places, standing under the falls. I mean, the water is just rushing down with this amazing force, and it's frigid because it has been covered with ice in Lake Erie all winter, and so it's coming over and it's racing towards you. It sounds like a bunch of trains coming at you. And so you quickly struggle to secure your little garbage bag around your face, and so that you can at least take a look at this amazing sight while you are getting this deluge of water over your face, your entire body. It's pouring over your feet and your legs. Thank goodness I put my shoes in a plastic bag. And I noticed something about the people down there and how people responded to that. I noticed that there were some people who rushed through it so fast that they scarcely even got to see it because they were just so overwhelmed with the water, they were just struggling to get out alive. So they would run through it. And then there was this other group of people who would stand there in awe, and they just stood there looking at it. And they couldn't believe the splendor of the falls, and they were willing to take that water torture because it was just so beautiful. And then there was a third group of people. These were the interesting ones. They would go in it, and they'd take that fire hydrant of water coming down on them, and then they'd go out and they'd go back in and do it again. And even more, they'd take their friends. They'd convince their friends to go back in with them. Well, it was an amazing experience for all of us, but I really, truly think it was the closest thing to a whirlwind that I could have ever experienced, and I would highly recommend it if you have the opportunity. Well, the image of God as a whirlwind comes to us today in the Old Testament lesson of Job that we heard, where Job questions God and God responds to him. Now, interestingly, God doesn't answer Job's questions, but what he does say to him is out of a whirlwind. And it seems like a simple exchange between Job, who is questioning God on things that he simply does not have the ability as a human to comprehend. And God very quickly shuts him up with this display of immeasurable wisdom and power. He's basically saying to Job, there is nothing greater than my authority, so you only have to submit to it and rest in my care. I think a lot of us, we can relate to this experience. We ask the questions that we simply can't comprehend, and we're given a very firm response of just trust me. I know what I'm doing. Okay, so that's good enough. I can be done and we can all go home, right? That's the answer. But this is a little bit of a tough love kind of answer in a world that is very tumultuous, that feels like the cave of the winds much of the time, where we're drowning in the wind and the waterfalls of life. This has pure truth in it, of course. Trust God. But maybe we need to hear a little bit more in order to find the calm and the peace that our hearts seek. So let's take a look a little further into our gospel of Mark. This is a story of Jesus calming the storm. Okay, so as Mark relays it, the disciples are on a boat and a violent storm comes up. Now, you've probably seen a storm blow in at some point. Well, just this last week, we were out doing some yard work, and Chris looked up and we saw these clouds. They were just billowing and building, and you might have seen those, and they were very, very dark and ominous, and they were to the north of us. And Chris said, boy, I wouldn't want to be up north because I think that's going to be bad. And sure enough, later we found out that there had been some tornado sightings or tornadic activity up there. So those clouds, we saw that storm coming in, and we could pretty much see what was going to happen. Well, many of the disciples, they spent their lives as on the sea as fishermen. So they knew storms. They knew if a storm was coming. So when Jesus suggested going to the other side of the sea, they probably would have said, hey, I see a storm coming. There's something brewing. Maybe we should wait. But Matthew tells us that it was a sudden storm. Now, Mark says it was a great storm, but I'm going to guess it was pretty sudden because otherwise these fishermen would have seen it coming. So this sudden storm comes up, and it reminds us that in life, our storms are usually pretty sudden. Hearing the doctor say that you have cancer is a sudden storm. Having a child caught do something they shouldn't do, that's a sudden storm. We're sorry, but your job's being terminated. There's been an accident. That's a sudden storm. And when that happens, we're afraid. And how do we respond? We respond with this desperate panic prayer. Just like the disciples did when they were afraid. They called out to the one that they know could help. Teacher, don't you care if we perish? When we throw up this panic prayer, we're saying the same thing. But we can be sure of one thing. God does not share in our panic. God doesn't get surprised. As a matter of fact, I cannot picture him sitting there ever saying, wow, I never saw that coming. Because he knows everything. Now, God may show pity on us, and God probably feels very badly for us when we panic and we worry. But be assured that God does not panic, and God does not worry. He's most likely speaking to our hearts, as he did to Job. I am God. I have this. I'm in control. You do not need to worry or question. But his voice is often drowned out by the whirlwind of our overwhelming sense that we're going to drown. So, what about the people that don't panic? Sometimes we see them. They've found this calm in life, the peace that surpasses all understanding. So that whether the storm is calmed or whether the storm rages, they don't have fear because God is with them. The Apostle Paul says in Philippians 4:11-13 that he has learned the secret to facing the storms. He says that no matter what, he can make it through with Christ. He says, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. So the secret is, God is always with us. Just as Jesus was always in that boat with the disciples, God is faithful to us. And in the case of our boat, you notice that Jesus arose immediately, and he calmed the storm. Now, if he hadn't calmed the storm, it wouldn't have been because he didn't care. You see, when Christ is with you, even in the worst storms of life, even when they batter against your ship, even if your ship goes down, we never need to ask Jesus if he cares if we're perishing. He's already shown us that he cares very much if we perish. He died on the cross to keep us from perishing. And he did all that was necessary to make sure that when our ship goes down, when our earthly lives end, we do not perish. You see, this story of Jesus calming the storm shows his power over death. And Jesus, just as he rescued the disciples, he rescues each one of us every day. Now, his rescue doesn't necessarily keep us from storms, but his rescue does something much greater. It keeps us from perishing. And it changes the way we see storms. Last weekend we had some family over for a barbecue, and it began to rain a little bit. You might not know what rain is because we never see that around here. But it began raining a little bit. But what was kind of cool, it was also sunny at the same time. So immediately I thought, there's got to be a rainbow somewhere. I got to go see this. And there were a couple other family members just like me. So we start running around outside looking for a rainbow. Now the rest of the family stayed inside looking at us like we were crazy. So while we were out there looking for rainbows, they were looking for a place to stay dry. And it makes me think of those people who seem to be looking for figurative rainbows in their day. You know these people. They always see the best in people, the best in situations, and the bright side of everything. And yes, I know, it can get a little annoying sometimes, but they're out there. What a way to live life. And do you think that this comes naturally to them? To any of us? I don't think so. I think most of the time it's Jesus changing our perspective on the storms in life. And now we can either look for rainbows or we can look for the dry place to hide. When you know Jesus, it changes your outlook on life. He may not change the storms, but he will change you. So what does that mean for us then today? In the scriptures, the disciples believed that they were going to perish. And from the Greek, if we look at the Greek translation, it literally says, we're going down, we're sinking, we're going to die. There are times I've thought that. You see, Jesus was asleep in the boat, and I think he knew that the storm was coming and he knew it wasn't going to overtake them. But to calm the disciples down, he calmed the storm. To me, this scripture is a reminder that just like us, there are people all around us, and we feel like we're perishing. We think we might perish. And at those times, we, as the church, cannot be asleep in the bow. We cannot have our heads on our own comfy pillows, just resting, dozing in and out. We can't be asleep, living lives focused on our own needs, on our own comforts, on our own wants. You see, unlike Jesus knowing that the disciples would be okay, we know that people who don't know Jesus will perish. They have to be told about Jesus and his love for them. And we need to be the ones who say, I care that you do not perish. We must tell them, and we need to show them by being Jesus to them. Well, back to my story about the Cave of the Winds. When I left there, I felt very alive and invigorated. I was wet, yes. I was a little bit weary, yes. But I had lived through an experience of the power of God's creation and his presence in an amazing way. I had been changed by the whirlwind of water and wind and able to face maybe new challenges and opportunities with a little more faith and a little less fear. My perspective was changed. And like the disciples on the boat, our faith is not strong by itself. So we pray to God that he will rescue and protect us from the storms of life. And while these storms may never go away, when we feel his presence, his quick response of peace, we are able to face those things that threaten us and challenge our faith with strength and hope and with confidence. In 2 Corinthians 12:10, it says, whenever I am weak, then I am strong. And there are so many times that we feel weak, but with Jesus, we are strong. So may Jesus be your peace in the storms of life, and may you bring God's peace to others in those very same storms.